Kicked out at 16, an orphan inherits a dusty truck stop. What he found inside changed everything. This isn't just a story about property. It's a story about what it means to inherit a past you never understood and a future you have to build for yourself. If stories like this matter to you, about finding your place in the world against all odds, stick around and maybe hit that subscribe button. You're part of why these stories get told. I was standing in the doorway of the North Gate group home for the last time. The air outside was cold, carrying the damp, metallic smell of a city waking up in late autumn. Behind me was the smell of industrial cleaner and lukewarm oatmeal, the scent of my life for the past 2 years, ever since my grandmother died and the state decided I was a problem to be managed rather than a person to be raised. Today was my 18th birthday. It wasn't a celebration. It was an eviction notice delivered with a slice of dry cake at breakfast. They called it aging out. It felt more like being pushed off a cliff. Mr. Henderson, the home's director, a man whose smile never quite reached his tired eyes, handed me a black nylon duffel bag containing my entire life. 3 changes of clothes, a worn copy of a book my grandfather gave me when I was a small child, and a toothbrush. "Well, Leo," he said, his voice a gravelly monotone that suggested he'd said these same words 1,000 times. "The world's out there. Make good choices." He patted my shoulder, a gesture so devoid of warmth it was almost colder than the morning air. I just nodded. What was there to say? 2 years of silent meals, of curfews, of being watched and evaluated and filed away in a manila folder. 2 years of feeling like a ghost haunting the edges of other people's lives. The final piece of the state's farewell package was a thick, cream-colored envelope. My name and the home's address were typed on the front. "This came for you," Henderson said, his curiosity barely concealed. "From a law firm. We held on to it until today, per instructions." I took the envelope. It felt heavy, important. It felt like a stone dropping into the already churning water of my stomach. I stepped over the threshold, and the heavy metal door clicked shut behind me. The sound was so final, so absolute. I was out. No key, no curfew, no bed to return to. Just me, a duffel bag, a mysterious letter, and the vast, indifferent city. I walked for a block, then another, the duffel bag bumping against my leg. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to be somewhere other than there. I found a bus stop, the plastic bench slick with morning dew, and sat down. My hands were shaking, partly from the cold, partly from a terror so profound it felt like a physical part of me. I stared at the envelope. Albright, Sterling, and Dunn, attorneys at law. It sounded expensive. It sounded like a world I had no part in. With numb fingers, I tore it open. The paper inside was thick, official. It was a letter, formally worded, requesting my presence at their downtown office at my earliest convenience. It mentioned the estate of Arthur Vance, my grandfather. A jolt went through me, sharp and painful. I hadn't seen my grandfather since I was 6 years old. My grandmother, his estranged wife, had told me he was a drifter, a man who couldn't be relied on, a man who had simply vanished from our lives. After she got sick, he was a ghost I didn't even have time to think about. And now, a decade after he disappeared and 2 years after Grandma was gone, he was reaching out from beyond the grave through a team of lawyers. I read the line again. The estate of Arthur Vance. Estate. That meant he was gone. Really gone. A strange, hollow feeling opened up in my chest. You can't mourn someone you don't remember, but you can mourn the idea of them. You can mourn the questions you'll never get to ask. I folded the letter, shoved it into my pocket, and stood up. The world was out there, Anderson had said, and for the first time, I had a direction. Not a home, not a destination, but a starting point. A question that needed an answer. I had to go to that law office. I had to know what the man who abandoned me had left behind. I found the law firm in a glass and steel tower that scraped the sky, a building so clean and imposing it felt like it might reject me on principle. The lobby was all marble and hushed whispers, the air scented with leather and money. I felt the worn fabric of my jeans, the scuff marks on my boots. I was a stray dog in a palace. I gave my name to the receptionist, who looked at me over the top of her glasses with an expression of polite disbelief. But she made the call, and a few minutes later, a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and hair pulled back in a severe bun came out to greet me. "Mr. Vance, I'm Eleanor Albright." Her handshake was firm, her expression unreadable. She led me down a long corridor, our footsteps muffled by a thick carpet. The walls were lined with framed diplomas and pictures of stern-looking men. It was a place built to intimidate, to remind you of the weight of history and law. Her office was surprisingly simple. A large wooden desk, 2 chairs, and a window that overlooked the city from 30 floors up. She gestured for me to sit. "Thank you for coming in so promptly, Leo. May I call you Leo?" I just nodded, my throat too dry to speak. She sat down, folded her hands on the desk, and got right to it. There was no small talk, no attempt to put me at ease. I appreciated that. It felt honest. "As the letter stated," she began, "I am the executor of your grandfather's will. He passed away 3 months ago." She paused, as if to let that sink in. "I'm sorry for your loss." It was a formality, but her tone was even, not pitying. "I didn't know him," I said, the words coming out as a croak. "He left when I was a kid." "He was aware of that," she said, her gaze steady. "In fact, much of his final years was structured around that fact." She slid a thick folder across the desk. It had my name on it. "Your grandfather, Arthur, left you everything he had." My mind, conditioned by years of having nothing, couldn't even process the word everything. I imagined a small savings account, a few $100s maybe, enough for a deposit on a room somewhere. What did he have?" I asked. Ms. Albright took a deep breath. "He owned a property, a business. It's located in Sweetwater County, Wyoming. A truck stop, to be precise. It's called The Junction." I stared at her. A truck stop? In Wyoming? The words were nonsensical, like a sentence from a dream. My grandfather, the man I'd been told was a penniless drifter, owned a business? "He also left you this." She pushed a small, heavy metal box toward me. It was an old cash box, the gray paint chipped at the corners. "And the keys to the property." She laid a ring of keys on the desk. They were old, iron, heavy. One was a large, ornate key, the kind you'd see in a movie. The others were for trucks, for padlocks, for doors I couldn't imagine. "I don't understand," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Why? Why me? Why did he leave at all?" Ms. Albright's professional mask softened for just a fraction of a second. A flicker of something that looked like sympathy crossed her face. "He wanted to explain that himself. He left you a series of letters. I believe they are in that box. His instructions were very clear. You were to receive this on your 18th birthday, not a day before." She then slid another set of papers across the desk. These were slick, glossy. A letterhead from a company called Apex Development. "There is one more thing," she said, her voice returning to its business-like tone. "The property has fallen into some disrepair. The property taxes for the last 2 years are overdue. They amount to just over $8,000. If they are not paid within 60 days, the county will seize the property and auction it off." My heart sank. $8,000. It might as well have been 8 million. "However," she continued, before I could fully despair, "Apex Development has been trying to acquire the land for some time. They are building a new resort complex in the area. Your grandfather consistently refused to sell. Now that he has passed, they have renewed their offer. They are offering $250,000 for the land, as is. The offer is contingent on a quick sale. It would be enough to cover the back taxes, my legal fees, and leave you with a substantial amount to start your new life." She let the number hang in the air. $250,000. It was an impossible sum, a life-changing amount of money. I could walk away from this room, from this city, from my entire past. I could be someone else, somewhere else. All I had to do was sign a paper, sell a place I'd never seen, left to me by a man I barely knew. "This offer would solve all your immediate problems, Leo," Ms. Albright said gently. "It's a clean break, a fresh start." It was everything I thought I wanted, a way out. But then my eyes fell on the metal box and the heavy iron keys. My grandfather had refused to sell. He had wanted me to have this place. He had left letters. He wanted to explain. A clean break meant never knowing why. It meant accepting the story I'd been told my whole life, that I was abandoned, that I wasn't worth sticking around for. For the first time in a long time, a feeling other than fear or numbness sparked inside me. It was anger. And beneath the anger, a stubborn knot of curiosity. "What if I don't want to sell?" I asked. Ms. Albright looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a genuine, small smile. "Then you have 60 days to come up with $8,000, she said, "and a lot of work ahead of you. The bus to Rock Springs, Wyoming leaves at 7 p.m. I took the liberty of booking you a ticket. It's your choice whether you use it." The bus ride was a 20-hour journey into the heart of a country I'd only seen in pictures. The city lights and concrete canyons of my past bled away, replaced by an endless expanse of farmland, then rolling hills, and finally the vast, empty plains of the West. I sat with my face pressed against the cool glass, the black duffel bag on the seat beside me, the heavy metal box on my lap. I didn't open it, not yet. It felt too sacred, too final. The journey itself was part of the ritual. With every mile that passed, I felt like I was shedding a layer of my old life. The institutional gray of the group home, the anonymous bustle of the city, the weight of being a ward of the state, it all seemed to be receding in the rear-view mirror of the bus. My fellow passengers were a collection of weary travelers, each lost in their own world. A young mother trying to keep her toddler entertained, an old man sleeping with his hat over his eyes, a soldier in uniform staring blankly out the window. We were all in transit, all between one life and another. I felt a strange sense of belonging with them, these strangers on a journey to somewhere else. For the first time, I wasn't the odd one out. I was just another person on the road. The landscape began to change dramatically as we crossed into Wyoming. The world flattened out, stretching to a horizon so wide it felt like you could see the curvature of the earth. It was a space so big you could lose. It was a space so big you could lose yourself in it, or maybe find yourself. I thought about the money. $250,000. The number played over and over in my head. It was safety. It was a new identity. It was the smart choice, the logical choice. Ms. Albright had all but told me to take it, but my grandfather's refusal echoed louder. Why would a man who had nothing, a man who had to give up his own grandson, turn down $250,000? There had to be a reason, and that reason was waiting for me at the end of this bus ride. The bus finally pulled into the station at Rock Springs, a small, wind-swept town that looked like it had been carved out of the rugged landscape. The air was different here. It was thin and sharp and smelled of sagebrush and cold earth. It felt real. "Where to, son?" he asked, looking at me. "Where to, son?" he asked, looking at me in the rear-view mirror. I gave him the address. He raised an eyebrow. "The old junction? Haven't been out that way in years. Didn't think anyone was still there since Art passed." My heart jumped. "You knew him? Arthur Vance?" The driver, whose name I learned was Mel, nodded slowly. "Knew Art for 30 years. Stubborn as a mule, but a good man. Heart of gold, even if he didn't like to show it. The whole town was sorry to hear he'd passed. He kept to himself the last few years." Kept to himself. That's what they said. But Mel's words painted a different picture than the one I had in my head. Not a drifter, a good man, stubborn. The taxi ride took another 20 minutes, leaving the small town behind and heading out onto a long, straight, 2-lane highway. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and purple. Then Mel slowed the taxi and pointed. "There she is." At first it was just a silhouette against the dying light. A low-slung building, the skeletal frame of a large sign, the hulking shapes of what looked like old gas pumps. As we got closer, the details emerged, and my heart sank. It was a ruin. The sign, which must have once been a proud beacon of light and color, was now a rusted skeleton. A few letters still clung to it. Juntio. The main building had boarded-up windows, and the paint was peeling off in long, curling strips. The asphalt of the parking lot was cracked and webbed with weeds. A single, ancient diesel pump stood like a lonely sentinel, its hose dry-rotted and cracked. Mel pulled the taxi up to what looked like the main entrance. "This is it, son. Family?" "His grandson," I said. The words, "family?" "His grandson," I said, the words feeling strange on my tongue. Mel's eyes widened slightly. "Well, I'll be. He talked about you sometimes, said he had a grandson back east." He talked about me. The simple sentence hit me with the force of a physical blow. He hadn't forgotten me. I paid Mel, and he gave me his card. "You need anything, a ride back to town, you call me. It gets lonely out here." I thanked him, grabbed my duffel bag, and stood there as his taxi did a U-turn and drove away, its red taillights shrinking into the vast darkness until they were gone. And then I was alone. The silence was absolute, broken only by the mournful sound of the wind whistling through the rusted sign. The sun had finally dipped below the horizon, and the temperature was dropping fast. A profound, bone-deep feeling of dread washed over me. What was I doing here? This was a mistake. This wasn't an inheritance. It was a tomb. I should have taken the money. I fumbled in my pocket for the keys Ms. Albright had given me. My fingers closed around the large, ornate one. It had to be for the main building. I walked up the 2 concrete steps to the front door. It was solid wood, weathered and gray. The keyhole was caked with rust and dust. For a moment, I was sure it wouldn't work, that I would be stuck out here in the cold with no way in. I slid the key in. It grated, resisted. I put my shoulder into it, turning with all my might. There was a loud, groaning crack, and the lock turned. The door swung inward on creaking hinges, opening into a cavern of darkness. The air that rushed out was stale, thick with the scent of dust, old coffee, and something else. Something like time itself, trapped in a bottle. I took a deep breath, hoisted my bag, and stepped inside. I had arrived. The darkness inside was total. I fumbled along the wall, my fingers brushing against cold, dusty surfaces, until I found a light switch. I flicked it up. Nothing. Of course. The power had been off for months, maybe years. I dug through my duffel bag and found the small flashlight I'd packed, a cheap plastic thing from the group home. I switched it on. The beam cut a weak, trembling circle through the gloom. I was standing in what must have been the diner. Booths with cracked red vinyl upholstery lined the walls. Round stools were bolted to the floor in front of a long counter. Behind the counter, an old-fashioned cash register sat with its drawer open, empty. Coffee mugs were still stacked neatly, covered in a thick layer of gray dust. It was like a scene from a post-apocalyptic movie, a place abandoned in a hurry. But it wasn't. It was just forgotten. I swept the beam of light around the room. On the wall behind the counter, a menu was still chalked onto a blackboard. Art's famous chili, bottomless coffee, mile-high pie, a ghost of a life I'd never known. I walked behind the counter, my boots crunching on something. I looked down. The floor was littered with shattered glass from a broken window pane. The wind was finding its way in, making a low, moaning sound. This was my inheritance. A broken-down diner, a cracked parking lot, and a pile of debt. The developer's offer felt more tempting than ever. It was a voice of reason in my head, telling me to get back in a taxi, go back to the city, sign the papers, and never look back. But I couldn't. Not yet. I still had the box. I sat down in one of the dusty booths, the vinyl cracking under my weight. I placed the metal cash box on the table in front of me. It had a small, simple lock. One of the smaller keys on the ring Ms. Albright had given me fit perfectly. With a small click, the lock opened. I lifted the lid. The inside was lined with faded red felt, and nestled within were three things: a stack of envelopes, tied together with a simple piece of twine, a single old photograph, and a thick roll of cash held together with a rubber band. My hands were shaking as I picked up the photograph. It was faded, the corners soft and worn. It was a picture of a young man with a wide, easy smile, his arm around a young woman. The man had my eyes. He was holding a baby, wrapped in a blue blanket. Me. And the woman, it must have been my mother. I had no pictures of her. My grandmother, in her grief and anger, had thrown them all away. I stared at her face, a face I'd only ever imagined. She was beautiful, and she was smiling. The man, my grandfather Arthur, was looking at her with a love so clear, so profound, it transcended the faded, yellowed paper. This wasn't the face of a man who drifts away. This was the face of a man who was anchored to his family. My throat grew tight. I carefully placed the photo on the table and turned to the roll of cash. I unrolled it. It was all $100 bills. I didn't count it then, but I could tell it was a lot. More than I had ever seen in my life. It was a lifeline. But it wasn't the most important thing in the box. The most important thing was the stack of letters. There were at least a dozen of them, the envelopes yellowed with age. On the top envelope, in a strong, clear hand, was written, "For Leo, when you're ready." I was here. I was 18. I had the keys. I was as ready as I would ever be. I untied the twine and took the first letter from the stack. The paper was thick, the ink slightly faded. I took a deep breath, held the flashlight steady, and began to read. "My dearest Leo," it began, "if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are a man. I am sorry for that. I'm sorry I wasn't there to see it happen. I'm sorry for every birthday I missed, for every school play I wasn't there for every time you scraped your knee and I wasn't there to pick you up. Most of all, I'm sorry that for your whole life you've probably believed that I left you, that I didn't want you. That is the greatest lie of our lives, and it is a lie I was forced to tell to protect you." The words blurred. I had to stop, wiping my eyes with the sleeve of my jacket. I wasn't just crying from sadness. It was something else. It was the sound of a wall I had built around my heart for 12 years beginning to crack. I took another shaky breath and continued reading. "Your grandmother, God rest her soul, was a good woman, but she was proud. When we lost your mother, a part of your grandmother died too, and she blamed me. In a way, she was right to. The world I was in was no place for a child. Before I met your mom, I made some bad choices, Leo. I got tangled up with some very bad people. I thought I had left that life behind when you were born, but it has a long shadow. After your mom's accident, they came back. They said I owed them, and when I couldn't pay, they made threats. Not against me, against you." My blood ran cold. The flashlight beam trembled in my hand. I couldn't let them get to you. I couldn't risk it. So I did the only thing I could think of. I disappeared. I made it look like I was running away, like I was the deadbeat your grandmother always feared I was. It was better for you to hate me and be safe than for you to love me and be in danger. I gave your grandmother all the money I had, and I walked away. It was the hardest day of my life. I came out here, to this place. This truck stop was my one clean asset, the one thing they didn't know about. I worked, I saved, I lived like a monk, all with one goal in mind: to one day clear my name, pay my debts, and come back for you. But the world doesn't always work out the way you plan. The debt was larger than I knew, and my health, well, an old trucker's body can only take so much. When I realized I wasn't going to make it back to you, I started writing these letters. I started saving. Everything I've done, every greasy burger I've flipped, every tire I've changed in the dead of winter has been for you. This place, the junction, it isn't much to look at now, but it's yours. It's free and clear of my past. The people I owed are long gone. This land is clean. There's a developer who wants it. They'll offer you a lot of money. You can take it. I won't blame you. You can have the fresh start I always wanted for you. But I want you to know what this place is. It's not just dirt and a broken-down building. It's a promise. It's every dream I had for you, built with my own 2 hands. It's the only real thing I have to give you. There's money in the box. I hope it's enough for the taxes, with some left over. The choice is yours, son. It always has been. Loving Grandfather, Arthur. I finished Loving Grandfather, Arthur. I finished the letter, and the dam broke. I put my head down on the dusty table next to the faded photograph of my family, and I cried. I cried for the grandfather I never knew, a hero disguised as a villain. I cried for the years we had lost. I cried for the little boy who believed he was worthless. And for the first time, I cried from a place of relief. The story of my life wasn't one of abandonment. It was a story of sacrifice. It was a story of a fierce, hidden love. I sat there in the cold, dark diner for a long time. the single beam of my flashlight illuminating the letter, the photo, and the keys. The wind howled outside, but it didn't sound menacing anymore. It sounded like a challenge. The choice was mine. Sell this ruin and take the easy money, the clean break, or stay. Stay in this forgotten place, in the middle of nowhere, and fight for a ghost's legacy. It wasn't really a choice at all. This place wasn't a property, it was a promise, and I was going to keep it. The first light of dawn crept through the broken window, casting long, dusty fingers across the diner. The world outside the boards was a pale, washed-out gray. I had fallen asleep at the table, my head resting on my arms. My neck was stiff, and the cold had seeped deep into my bones. But for the first time and as long as I could remember, I didn't wake up with a feeling of dread. I woke up with a purpose. I stood up and stretched, my joints cracking in protest. The diner looked even more pathetic in the daylight. The dust wasn't just a layer, it was an archaeological stratum. The decay was real. But now, I saw it differently. I didn't see the ruin, I saw the foundation. My first order of business was to take stock. I had the keys, I had the letters, and I had the cash. I sat back down and counted the roll my grandfather had left me. It was exactly $10,000, enough to pay the $8,000 in taxes and leave me with $2,000 for supplies. It was a carefully calculated gift, a test. It wasn't enough to make me rich, but it was enough to give me a fighting chance. Armed with my flashlight, I began a systematic exploration of my new kingdom. The diner was connected to a small two-room apartment in the back, a bedroom and a small living area with a kitchenette. It was sparse, monastic. A simple bed with a thin mattress, a wooden table with one chair, and a bookshelf. The bookshelf was filled with worn paperbacks, westerns, thrillers, books on engine repair and philosophy. My grandfather's mind laid bare. On the bedside table was a framed photo. It was a school picture of me, age 6, the one taken right before he left. He had kept it with him all these years. He had looked at my face every night before he went to sleep. The thought was a punch to the gut, both painful and profoundly comforting. I found the main breaker box in a utility closet. It was ancient, with thick ceramic fuses, but it looked sound. The problem wasn't the building, it was the grid. The power line from the main road had been disconnected. That was a problem for another day. A bigger problem was water. I found the taps in the kitchenette and the diner's kitchen. They were dry. Outside, behind the main building, I found a large propane tank, empty, and a wellhead with a hand pump attached. I grabbed the cold iron handle and began to pump. For a long minute, there was only a dry, sucking sound. My heart sank. If there was no water, this whole enterprise was dead before it started. But I kept pumping, putting my back into it, gritting my teeth. And then, a gurgle, a sputter, and finally, a trickle of rusty brown water coughed from the spout. I kept pumping, and the water slowly began to run clearer. It was ice cold and smelled of minerals and earth, but it was water. It was life. I felt a surge of triumph, a feeling so primal and satisfying it was almost dizzying. I had made water come from the ground. It was a small victory, but it was mine. The rest of the day was a blur of discovery. I explored the garage, a huge, cavernous space that smelled of oil and metal. It was a mechanic's paradise, filled with tools that were old but well cared for. Wrenches and sockets hung in neat rows on a pegboard. A heavy-duty engine hoist stood in the corner. There was a pit in the floor for working under trucks. This was how he had made his living. Not just flipping burgers, but fixing the massive rigs that were the lifeblood of this country. This was a place of real work. On his workbench, amidst the clutter of spare parts and oily rags, I found more. Another letter, this one not in an envelope. It was weighted down by a heavy socket wrench. This one was different. If you've decided to stay, then you need to know the whole truth. It's not just about the past, it's about the future. Apex Development, the company that wants to buy this land, they're not just building a resort. They're after something more. My skin prickled. There's a reason the water out here is so good. I had it tested years ago. It's one of the purest underground springs in the state. Apex knows this. They don't want the land for the view. They want it for the water. They plan to drain the aquifer, bottle it, and sell it, leaving the whole valley dry. They tried to bully me into selling, but I wouldn't. This water belongs to the land, not to a corporation. The proof of their plan and the original water survey are hidden. You were my last defense, but you need to be the first line of attack. The fight isn't over. It's just beginning. Look in the heart of the beast, the 58. The 58? I looked around the garage. In the far corner, covered by a massive, dusty tarp, was the unmistakable shape of a classic truck. I walked over and pulled back the tarp. Underneath was a magnificent, if neglected, 1958 Chevrolet Apache pickup. Its paint was faded, and there was rust on the chrome, but its lines were beautiful. It was a piece of art, the heart of the beast, the engine. I popped the hood. The engine block was a massive V8, coated in a layer of grease and dust. I didn't know what I was looking for. I ran my hands over the cold metal, feeling for anything unusual. My fingers brushed against the air filter cover. It was a round, metal pan. It seemed loose. I found a screwdriver and pried it off. Underneath, where the filter should have been, was a false bottom. And inside that hidden compartment was a sealed, waterproof document tube. My hands trembled as I unscrewed the cap. Inside was a roll of papers. I unrolled them on the hood of the truck. The first was the geological survey my grandfather had mentioned, a detailed map of the underground aquifer, with flow rates and purity levels that were off the charts. The second was a sheaf of internal memos from Apex Development. I didn't know how he had gotten them, but they were damning. They detailed the entire plan. Acquire the cheap, unproductive land along the highway, sink industrial wells, and secure the water rights before the public or regulatory bodies could react. They referred to the locals, people like my grandfather, as holdouts and minor obstacles. They weren't just buying land, they were planning a theft on a grand scale. And the last thing in the tube was a small, leather-bound ledger. I opened it. It was a record of every cash payment my grandfather had made over 15 years to a collector. Payments to keep the sharks from his past away from me. The final payment was dated 2 years ago, right after my grandmother had died and I had entered the system. The note next to it said, "Paid in full. He's safe now." He had spent the last of his strength and money, not on himself, but on finally, completely, clearing the path for me. He had died just a few months after ensuring my freedom. The weight of it all, the intricate, painful tapestry of his sacrifice, was overwhelming. This was so much bigger than a truck stop. This was about water, about a community, about a promise to a whole valley. And Apex Development had no idea that the minor obstacle they thought was gone had just been replaced. They thought they were dealing with a grieving, naive kid who would take the money and run. They didn't know they were dealing with Arthur Vance's grandson. I closed the ledger and put the documents back in the tube. The choice had been made for me, not by my grandfather, but by the truth. I couldn't sell. I wouldn't sell. I had to fight. And as I stood there in that dusty garage, surrounded by the tools of my grandfather's trade, I knew I wasn't alone. He was there, in the grease, in the steel, in the very water under my feet. And we had work to do. The next few weeks were the hardest and most real of my life. My days fell into a rhythm dictated by the sun and the sheer amount of work to be done. My first trip was back to town. I called Mel, the taxi driver, who seemed genuinely pleased to hear from me. He drove me to the county courthouse in Rock Springs, a stern-looking stone building. I walked in, found the tax assessor's office, and with a hand that was surprisingly steady, I paid the $8,112.42 in back taxes. The clerk, a woman who looked like she'd seen it all, barely looked up. She stamped my receipt with a loud, satisfying thud and handed it to me. "Property is current," she said. I walked out of that courthouse feeling 10 feet tall. I had honored the first part of the promise. The junction was mine, free and clear, for now. The remaining $2,000 of my grandfather's money went fast. I spent it on the essentials: propane for the tank, which meant hot water and a working stove; a new battery for the old Apache truck; gallons of industrial cleaner, mops, buckets, sponges; and food, lots of it. Canned goods, pasta, coffee. I was stocking up for a siege. And then the real work began. I attacked the diner first. I opened all the doors and windows, letting the clean, sharp Wyoming air flush out the stale smell of decay. I swept and mopped, scrubbed and scoured. I washed every plate, every cup, every piece of silverware until my hands were raw. I patched the broken window with a piece of plywood I found in the garage. It was ugly, but it kept the wind out. Slowly, painstakingly, the diner started to transform. The thick layer of dust gave way to the original cherry red of the vinyl booths. I devoured my grandfather's books. Learning about diesel engines, about plumbing, about the history of the West. And I read his letters. One by one, I worked my way through the stack, letting his voice, his wisdom, his pain, and his love wash over me. He wrote about his regrets, his hopes for me, his philosophy on life. "A man isn't what he says he is, Leo," one letter read. "He's what he builds, what he fixes, what he leaves behind for others. Don't ever forget that." One evening, as I was working late in the garage, trying to get the Apache's engine to turn over, a pair of headlights swept across the parking lot. A big rig, one of the modern aerodynamic ones, pulled in and hissed to a stop. My heart hammered in my chest. I wasn't ready for customers. A large man with a grizzled beard and a friendly face climbed down from the cab. He looked around, a puzzled expression on his face. "Evening," he called out, his voice booming in the quiet. "Saw the lights. Thought I was seeing a ghost. Is this place open?" Not yet," I stammered, wiping my greasy hands on a rag. "Soon, I hope." The man walked closer, peering into the clean diner. "Well, I'll be. I used to stop here all the time. Art always had the best coffee on I-80. My name's Frank. I drive this route twice a week." "Leo," I said, extending a hand. He shook it, his grip like a vice. "Arthur was my grandfather." Frank's face broke into a wide grin. "No kiddin'. You're Art's kid? He was a good man. Taught me how to change a fuel filter in a snowstorm right in this very garage. Saved my bacon more than once." We talked for an hour. He told me stories about my grandfather, about his quiet generosity, his dry sense of humor. He painted a picture of a man who was a pillar of this lonely highway community. Before he left, he looked at me, his eyes serious. "Listen, kid, a lot of us old-timers miss this place. If you get the coffee brewing again, you spread the word. We'll be back." His visit was a turning point. It made it all real. This wasn't just my fight. It was a fight for the memory of a good man and the community he served. A few days later, a sleek black SUV I didn't recognize pulled into the lot. A man in an expensive suit got out. He looked out of place, a wolf in a sheep pasture. He had the slick, predatory smile of a salesman. "Leo Vance?" he asked, striding toward me. "My name is Robert Harrison. I'm with Apex Development." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Sympathy in his voice, as fake as a sympathy in his voice, as fake as a $3 bill. He was a tough negotiator. "He wasn't a negotiator," I said. "He was a man who knew the value of his property." Harrison chuckled. "Right. Well, be that as it may, circumstances have changed. We received notice that you've paid the back taxes, a commendable effort. But you're a smart kid. You see the reality of this place. It's a relic. We're prepared to increase our offer. 300,000 for a quick, painless transaction. You could be on a beach in Mexico by next week." 300,000. It was a staggering amount of money. But I looked at his smug face, and I thought about the aquifer, about the community, about my grandfather's ledger. I thought about Frank the trucker. "The answer is no," I said. Harrison's smile faltered. "I don't think you understand, son. This isn't a request. That resort is happening. The governor himself is behind it. You're just a small bump in the road. We can make this easy, or we can make it very, very hard. There are other ways to acquire property: health code violations, zoning issues. It can get very expensive for a small business owner." It was a threat, plain and simple. My grandfather's words echoed in my head. They tried to bully me. "This is my property, Mr. Harrison," I said, my voice shaking slightly, but holding firm. "You are trespassing. I suggest you leave." For a long moment, he just stared at me, his eyes cold and calculating. He was sizing me up, seeing if I would break. I held his gaze. I thought about the '58 Apache, about the document tube hidden inside. I had a weapon he didn't know about. Finally, he gave a short, humorless laugh. "Have it your way, kid. But don't say I didn't warn you." He got back in his SUV, and it sped away, leaving a cloud of dust in its wake. I stood there for a long time, my heart pounding. The first shot had been fired. This was real. I was scared, but I was also angry, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my soul, that I was not going to lose. That night, I made a phone call. "Ms. Albright, it's Leo Vance. I'm not selling, but I think it's time we talked about filing an injunction." The phone call to Ms. Albright was like flipping a switch. Her voice, which had been professionally detached, became sharp, focused, and energized. "An injunction? On what grounds, Leo?" "On the grounds of environmental fraud," I said, the words feeling powerful on my tongue. I explained everything: the second letter, the water survey, the internal memos from Apex. I could almost hear the gears turning in her legal mind. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When she finally spoke, her voice was different. Ammunition. "Okay, Leo, here's what we're going to do." The next month was a whirlwind of strategy and preparation. Ms. Albright became my general, and I became her soldier on the front lines. She filed the injunction, citing the evidence from the document tube, which sent a shockwave through Apex Development and the County Planning Commission. Their painless land acquisition was suddenly a very public and very messy legal battle. While she fought the war in the courtroom, I fought it on the ground. I used the last of my money to get the power reconnected. The day the lights flickered on in the diner was a major victory. I stood under the buzzing fluorescent bulbs, a grin spreading across my face. The junction was coming back to life. My next project was the big sign. The rusted skeleton had taunted me since I arrived. I spent a week on a rickety ladder, sanding down the rust, treating the metal, and repainting it in its original colors. A vibrant red and a brilliant white. I couldn't afford neon yet, so I bought high-intensity spotlights and aimed them at the newly painted letters. The night I finished, I drove a mile down the highway and looked back. There it was, glowing in the darkness. The junction. It was a beacon. It was a declaration. Word began to spread, just as Frank the trucker said it would. The old-timers, the ones who remembered art, started stopping by. At first, it was just for a chat, to see the kid who was trying to bring the old place back. I didn't have much to offer, but I always had a pot of coffee on. I used my grandfather's recipe, strong and black. They would sit at the counter, nursing their mugs and telling me stories. They told me about the blizzards my grandfather helped them through, the times he extended credit when they were broke, the quiet wisdom he'd offer, along with a slice of pie. I was learning about him through the eyes of the community he had built. Each story was a piece of the puzzle, a confirmation of the man in the letters. One of those truckers, a man named Dave, was a retired journalist. When he heard what I was doing and why, his eyes lit up. "This is a great story, kid," he said. "A David and Goliath story. People need to hear about this." He made some calls. A week later, a reporter and a photographer from a regional newspaper showed up. I was nervous, but I told them everything. I showed them the diner, the garage, the letters. I told them about my grandfather's sacrifice and Apex's plan to drain the aquifer. The story ran on the front page. Orphan reclaims grandfather's legacy, fights corporate giant to save valley's water. It was dramatic, but it was true, and it changed everything. The article was picked up by statewide news outlets, then a national wire service. Suddenly, the junction wasn't just a truck stop. It was a symbol. It was a rallying point for everyone who had ever felt pushed around by a big corporation. And this is the part of the story where you all come in. You, the audience. I know some of you watching this have been in that position. You felt like a small bump in the road. You've been told that progress is inevitable, and you're just in the way. If this story is hitting you in a real place, let me know in the comments. Have you ever had to stand up for something, even when you were scared? Sharing these stories is how we remind each other that we're not alone. It's how we turn individual struggles into a collective voice. So, if you feel that, I want you to hit that like button, not for me, but for the idea that one person, armed with the truth, can make a difference. The support was a tidal wave. Donations started to trickle in through a P.O. box Ms. Albright helped me set up. $5 from a farmer in the next county. $20 from a teacher in Cheyenne. $100 from a retired trucker in Florida who remembered my grandfather. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough. Enough to buy a new commercial coffee machine. Enough to fix the neon on the sign. Enough to hire a part-time cook, a woman from town named Maria, whose diner had been put out of business years ago. People started showing up not just for coffee, but to help. A local plumber spent a weekend helping me fix the ancient pipes. An electrician volunteered to update the wiring in the garage. A group of local ranchers organized a cleanup day and helped me clear the years of debris from the parking lot and surrounding land. They weren't just helping me, they were reclaiming a piece of their own community. The junction was becoming what it used to be, a place where people came together. Robert Harrison from Apex paid me one more visit. This time, he didn't get out of his SUV. He just idled in the parking lot, which was now filled with the cars and trucks of my new customers and friends. He looked at the clean diner, the glowing sign, the people laughing and talking inside. He looked at me, standing on the front porch with my arms crossed, and I could see the defeat in his eyes. He hadn't counted on this. He had counted on me being alone. He put the SUV in reverse and drove away. I never saw him again. A few weeks later, Ms. Albright called. Her voice was jubilant. "We won, Leo. We won." Faced with the bad publicity, the mounting legal fees, and the undeniable evidence of the water survey, Apex had folded. They withdrew their development plan and their offer. The injunction was made permanent. The aquifer was safe. I hung up the phone and walked out into the cool night air. The neon sign for The Junction was buzzing, casting a warm red glow over the parking lot. Frank's rig was parked in its usual spot. Through the window of the diner, I could see Maria wiping down the counter and a few locals chatting in a booth. The smell of coffee and frying bacon hung in the air. It smelled like home. I looked up at the vast, star-filled Wyoming sky, and I felt my grandfather's presence more strongly than ever. We did it, I thought. We did it. The months that followed the victory against Apex were a different kind of challenge. The adrenaline of the fight was gone, replaced by the steady, demanding rhythm of running a business. There were no more corporate villains to vanquish, only leaky faucets, late-night deliveries, and the endless task of keeping the coffee hot and the chili fresh. It was hard work, the kind that got into your bones and left you exhausted at the end of the day. And I loved every minute of it. The junction became a living, breathing thing. Maria, the cook I'd hired, turned out to be a culinary genius with a deep love for classic diner food. Her mile-high pie became legendary. Frank and the other old-timer truckers became my unofficial board of directors, offering unsolicited but usually correct advice on everything from inventory management to the best way to patch a pothole in the asphalt. The community that had rallied behind me during the fight stayed with me in the peace. The place became more than just a stop for gas and coffee. It became a hub. We started hosting a weekly farmers market in the parking lot for the local ranchers. On Friday nights, a few guys with guitars would show up and play old country songs, turning the diner into an impromptu music hall. It was a place of connection in a world that was increasingly disconnected. I found my own place in it all. I wasn't the scared kid who stepped off the bus anymore. I was Leo, the guy who ran the junction. I learned how to fix a diesel engine, how to negotiate with suppliers, how to make a perfect omelet, and, most importantly, how to listen. Every person who sat at my counter had a story, and I learned more from them than I ever could have from a book. I learned about the price of cattle, the challenges of raising a family on a single income, the quiet joys of seeing a sunset over the plains. I was no longer just the inheritor of my grandfather's legacy. I was an active participant in the life of this place. I kept the small apartment in the back as my own. It remained simple, but I added my own touches. I framed the photo of my young family and put it on the wall. I put the '58 Apache, now fully restored to its gleaming cherry-red glory in the main bay of the garage. Not as a tool, but as a monument. It was a reminder of where I came from and the journey I had taken. One day, a letter arrived. It was from Ms. Albright. It wasn't a legal document, just a personal note. She had seen a travel article online that mentioned a hidden gem of a truck stop in Wyoming with the best coffee on I-80. She wrote that she was proud of me and that my grandfather would have been too. Enclosed with the note was the last of my grandfather's letters, one she had held back per his instructions. To be given to Leo 1 year after he makes his choice, the instructions had read. I sat in my grandfather's favorite booth, the one in the corner with a view of the whole diner and the highway beyond, and opened it. The handwriting was strong again. This one was written long ago. My dearest Leo, it began. If you are reading this, it means you did it. You stayed. You fought. You built something. I knew you had it in you. The Vance stubbornness, I guess. I hope by now you've realized that what I left you wasn't a burden, but a gift. And not the gift of property, but the gift of purpose, for not taking the easy way out. Thank you for not taking the easy way out. Thank you for proving that the story I told myself about you, that you were strong and good and resilient, was true. You have given my life and my sacrifices meaning. The story doesn't end with me. It continues with you. And that is the greatest peace a man can know. Don't live in the past, son. Don't let this place become a museum to me. Make it your own. Change it. Improve it. Let it grow with you. And most importantly, fill it with life and laughter. That's all I ever wanted for it. For you. I love you. I've always loved you. Now go make some coffee. You probably have customers waiting. Your grandfather, Arthur. I folded the letter, a smile on my face and tears in my eyes. He was right. A trucker had just pulled up to the pumps. The bell on the diner door chimed, and a family with 2 tired kids came in, looking for a hot meal. Maria called from the kitchen, "Leo, we're low on potatoes." Life was calling. This story, my story, it's not really about inheriting a truck stop. It's about inheriting a choice. We're all dealt a hand in life, sometimes a good one, sometimes a tough one. We're all carrying stories about our past, stories told to us by others, stories we tell ourselves. But the most important story is the one we choose to write for ourselves from this day forward. My grandfather taught me that home isn't just a place you are given, it's a place you build, a place you defend, a place you fill with love and purpose. It's the harder path, for sure. It's easier to take the buyout, to walk away, to let the past define you. But the view from the harder path is so much better. I look around at this place, at the community we've built, at the life I have, and I know, with every fiber of my being, that I made the right choice. I chose the harder right over the easier wrong, and that has made all the difference. What this journey has taught me, more than anything, is that we are not as alone as we think. My strength didn't just come from within. It came from the love of a grandfather I barely knew, from the support of a community of strangers, from the shared belief in something good. And it comes from you, from people who take the time to listen to a story like this. So I want to ask you to do one last thing. In the comments below, I don't want you to just tell me what you thought of the story. I want you to share a time when you chose the harder path. A time when you stood up for something you believed in, even when it was scary. Let's fill that space with reminders of our collective strength. Let's build our own community right here. And if you want to hear more stories about second chances, about finding home, and about the power of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, please subscribe to the channel. It tells me that these stories matter and that our shared journey is worth documenting. Thank you for listening. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got a diner to run.